Casey, how are you? Happy holidays to you.
Hey, happy holidays to you guys, too.
Let's get into this Eagles-Redskins game, Casey. Let's first talk about Deshaun Jackson. And I've been asking this question pretty much all day. The deep threat that is Deshaun Jackson. I mean, since he's returned from that week in Week 9 with that hamstring injury, he's had a lot of big plays on the board, touchdowns of 77 yards, 63 yards, 56 yards. How much do the Eagles truly miss Deshaun Jackson in that vertical game, Casey?
I tell you what, this is going to probably be a surprising number. Since Week 9, Sam Bradford ranks first in the league in vertical yards per attempt. That's production on passes thrown 11 or more yards downfield. So the Eagles do miss Jackson. Don't get me wrong. They definitely do miss having a vertical threat. They've got a quarterback that's being able to post. I mean, you're talking he has better vertical numbers than Cam Newton or Russell Wilson, who are right behind him on that list. But still, he's got better vertical pass numbers as far as the yards per attempt than those. So the Eagles still could use a home run threat. They found a way to hit big plays even without having him in the lineup.
All right, Casey.
You just knocked me over with a
really.
with that stat, Casey.
And the thing about it, Casey, is this team is still below 500, even with those numbers. And a lot of people have been wanting Sam Bradford to throw the ball downfield, but still, you have blowouts on that schedule since Week 9, and it's it ended with Arizona's 40-17. Casey.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is you have there might be blown coverages by opposing team and things, but Bradford. He had fantastic, or really good, I should say, vertical pass numbers the last season he was under center in St. Louis, and he had some really, his receivers are bad here, his receivers are even worse there. So he's shown that he can get that kind of production out of subpar receivers and such. And should he be throwing the ball more? Absolutely, but that's, the Chip Kelly system is, it's a run-based, fast-paced, run-based offense. That's the whole idea behind it. But I think overall they should be throwing vertical passes more, and they definitely should be throwing vertical passes more in this game because since Week 12, no defense has given up more vertical passing yards than Washington.
Yeah, in the first game between those two teams, that was when Riley Cooper and Miles Austin got deep, so you would think there's going to be opportunities to go over the top, although Chris Culliver was kind of really banged up in that game. Now he's on IR, so we'll see how that shakes out. Casey, I wanted to ask you about how this offense, the Eagles' offense, is impacting the defense because – in theory, that's the Eagles' strength. When you look at players like Fletcher Cox and Malcolm Jenkins and Walter Thurman, how he's played this year, but the 45-point games, the 40-point games, is there something to the fact that this group is really worn down late in the season because of the way Chip Kelly plays his offense?
I think it is. I mean, the idea behind Kelly's, when he was in college, a college coach, Kelly he would rotate his starting defenders. He would have, I think it was 17 or 18 defenders who would rotate the starters. And I'm not just talking like defensive line rotations like we see in the NFL. He'd rotate corners and safeties. He'd rotate linebackers. I mean, he had an entire defensive rotation throughout all three levels. You can't do that in the NFL. Not as effectively. You can't really be rotating all your guys out. So when your team faces, I think it's 995 defensive plays the Eagles have faced this year. It's the most in the league. No other team has faced more plays on defense than the Eagles have. So when you're putting that much pressure on your defense, you're going to wear them down, and it's going to lead to situations like they had against Arizona last week where they gave up 117 yards after first defensive contact last week. The defender goes up, makes first defensive contact. The ball carrier still gets 117 more yards. It's the second highest total in that category this season. So, fatigue's leading to not being able to tackle. It's leading to plays like that. I think it's a problem.
Yeah, and this group's banged up. It looks like Benny Logan's not going to play, nose tackle. The corners, Eric Rowe, has concussion protocol, so he'll probably be back. Byron Maxwell, far more iffy. When you look at that Washington offense, are they going to go about beating the Eagles on the ground, or is it going to be Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Jordan Reed through the air?
I would think they'd go through the air is what I think they do, although I think they can put the ball on the ground. I think they can do that. I think the Eagles, though, I would bet last year in the late season Washington game, Philadelphia threw the ball a ton because they saw matchups that were favorable towards throwing the football. And Kelly, on occasion, will change his game plan, say instead of being such a run-heavy game plan, they'll say he will throw the ball vertical when the situation calls for it. I think this situation calls for it. So I'm not going to be surprised to see Philadelphia throw the ball a lot in this game. And if they do, Washington's going to have to respond with a lot of throws. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a 37-34 game.
Let's talk about, Casey, Kirk Cousins. very kind of sneaky athletic. I know he had a rushing touchdown last week against Buffalo, so he has no problem kind of, using that bootleg and doing the play-action game. But how about Kirk Cousins this season? And really, again, talking about Deshaun Jackson, since D-Jax has returned from that injury, his numbers have kind of skyrocketed. How about Kirk Cousins, Casey?
Yeah, well, the fantasy owners are tearing their hair out about Cousins taking all those goal line touchdowns away from Alfred Morris.
Right.
They're thinking they can get double-digit points there, and here's Cousins going in for touchdown after touchdown. He's very athletic. He does hit vertical passes. Kirk Cousins' problem is he forces a lot of passes into coverage. He ranks very badly in my bad decision rate metric, which is how often the quarterback makes a mental error that leads to a turnover opportunity. And I hesitate to say he's bad at that because there will be stretches where he looks really good at that and he's not making any bad decisions at all. But there are just times where I don't know what it is, but he just decides I'm going to be forcing passes into coverage. And I think that could play in the Eagles' favor because if they start making this a shootout game and Cousins feels like he has to make big plays to keep up with a big play Philadelphia offense, I think he would throw a lot more passes into coverage. And the Eagles have some ball hawks that could take advantage of that.
Talking with Casey Joyner, the football scientist of ESPN.com, a little Eagles, Redskins. When you look at Washington, Casey, what do you see on the difference between this team at home, where they've dominated, versus the road, where there's just one win, and it was a field goal win over a bad team in Chicago?
It's always hard to say about that. I remember the old 49ers teams, the dynasty teams in the 80s. They were always subpar at home, or not subpar, because that's a dominant team, but they were always good at home, but great on the road. And they always said, being on the road is like a business trip for us. And they felt like they got away from the distractions when they were on the road. So some teams just react differently to home and road games. And I think for Washington, I don't know if that's part of it, but it could be that they just have a different mentality when they play road games versus home games.
Casey Joyner, football scientist, ESPN.com, NFL Insider. Peachy and John McMullen here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN FM. Let's go over to DeMarco Murray. Casey, just 2 carries on Sunday night against the Cardinals. Should we expect more of the same? What are you seeing from DeMarco Murray? Really, and again, this is a pretty big sample size now. We're through 15 games of the regular season now. What have you seen from DeMarco Murray, Casey? Is it scheme? Is it player? How about DeMarco Murray and his fit here, Casey?
I think of late the way they're looking at Murray is they're kind of approaching it the way that the Patriots do with their running backs. So they say, okay, we've got certain guys we'll play when we want to play power football against the other team, and certain guys we'll play when we want to play speed football. And the idea when you brought Murray in is he was going to be a guy who could do it all, like he did for Dallas. Dallas just used him last year. Dallas just used him all the time in every situation. And they were largely a run-heavy team, but they wouldn't pull him out too often when it came to other situations. But I think Philadelphia now has finally made the decision that there are certain things that DeMarco Murray does well and certain situations that he does well in, but when they got to play a speed offense, they're just not going to go in that direction. And being that I think they're going to look at this situation of this week against Washington and say, hey, we need to throw the football a lot, I don't think they're going to put Murray in the lineup because if you're going to throw the football a lot, you want to get the other running backs out there.
And speaking of fits, Casey, where are we in this offense moving forward? Doesn't matter how the Eagles end this season, because if they're 8-8, win the division, maybe lose in the first round of the playoffs, or they lose out, they're 6-10. How do you think Sam Bradford fits in this particular offense, and is he a fit? Because they have to make a decision after this season on their quarterback.
I think, people think that Chip Kelly has to have a mobile rushing quarterback, a guy who can run the football. Some people think that. And when you look at his history at Oregon, Chip Kelly would have quarterbacks who could rush the football, but he had quarterbacks also who didn't rush the football very well, and his offenses were just as good, and he was able to do just as much. He'll adapt his system. We know Bradford can hit the vertical pass. We've established that. He needs, they've had good pass blocking. They've had inconsistent pass blocking. There were times that the Eagles' pass block has been great, and times that it hasn't. You got to give Sam Bradford consistent pass blocking, and you probably have to give him better downfield threats. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm looking at Bradford going, is he a top 5 quarterback? Maybe not, but he's a top 10 caliber quarterback. That's good enough to get to a playoffs and good enough to win a Super Bowl with if you put a strong enough team around him. So keep Bradford, give him a better offensive line, and give him some better weapons, and get a good backup that you know you can rely on. And that would be like the main factors I would do with the rest of the season. But I'd start with, keep Bradford, because unless you think you can get a guy who's going to be a top 5 quarterback, you're not going to get an upgrade.
What we kind of established in the offseason, Casey, is as far as Chip Kelly is concerned with his offense, he feels or he doesn't want a featured guy for his offense. I mean, he got rid of McCoy, he got rid of Macklin. I guess he likes to spread the ball around. He doesn't feel like he needs a featured guy. Is that the best way to go about it, in your opinion? And do the Eagles have adequate guys at the wide receiver position and tight end position to make that work?
Again, going back to his college days, Chip Kelly had times where if he had a guy who was a wide receiver one, a guy who is a top, this guy's better than all my other receivers, he would direct a lot of additional passes in that direction. So he'll go that way if he feels like he's got a guy who he should throw the ball to a lot. He'll go to that person as a go-to receiver. So if he can find somebody of that caliber, then he'll do that. I think what he did with receivers this season or last couple of seasons, he said, I want guys who can block because I want to run the football, and I can't use smallest receiver. I can't have Macklin and Jackson out there trying to block for me because they're just not big enough. And I think that's what I think he went to wide receivers says, I got to have big guys out there. So, but now he needs guys who can stretch the field too. So, but I think the biggest thing for them is to make sure they get quality pass blocking all year long. Overall, their numbers in ESPN's pass metric have been top 5 in the league, but they've had really great games and really bad games. And you can't have stretches where they have 4 or 5 games that have just terrible pass blocking. You've got to do better than that. So I think that's where the Eagles need to start, to say all the other teams in the NFC East are starting to try to build power lines on offense and defense, especially, so I think the Eagles match that up and say, okay, that's the next place we need to build. Get Bradford here and give him some great blockers, because if we do that, the running game works better, the passing game works better, then we can concentrate on getting even better receivers.
Now, Casey, you mentioned those receivers. Now, as a whole, there hasn't been a lot of production. Obviously, Nelson Aguilar wasn't what was expected as a first-round pick. Josh Huff strikes me as more of a guy you have to manufacture touches for, not the greatest route runner in the world. And Jordan Matthews has kind of taken a step back, at least as far as consistency catching the football. Do you see room for growth among that core? Because it's difficult to add to that because you've invested so much, a first, a second, and a third-round pick. You can't really move on from those guys.
No, and we're looking at Aguilar. I think part of the problem with Aguilar, or part of the issue we have with him, is that he didn't come out and he's not this great receiver in year one. And so many receivers have come out of late and done great in year one. Odell Beckham Jr. was great in year one, and Sammy Watkins even had a good season in year one. A bunch of receivers were thinking that this is now par for the course, that a receiver can come into the NFL and produce from day one. For last season, though, you didn't think that would be the case for receivers. Usually it was, okay, you'll have an occasional receiver who will come in and produce from day one, but usually receivers take until year 2 or 3 before they really start to become, hit their stride and become a top receiver. So with Aguilar, I think that he's just not the year 1 guy, and you're going to have to say, okay, we're going to have to develop him and hope that in year 3 he becomes what we expected him to be. I would also, from the Eagles, a bit concerned about Zach Ertz, tight end Zach Ertz. He actually ranks in vertical, or he ranks first in the club in vertical targets and second in the club in vertical receptions and vertical touchdowns and vertical yards. I mean, most of the vertical game outside of Jordan Matthews ranks first in the categories where Ertz doesn't. Outside of Jordan Matthews, Zach Ertz is your best vertical threat. No disrespect to Zach Ertz. If I'm the Eagles, it's one of the main priorities I have next season is to say, I like Zach Ertz, but I want somebody else, a wide receiver, to be my second best vertical threat, not Zach Ertz.
All right, Casey Joyner, ESPN.com, the football scientist. Eagles and Redskins, Saturday Night Football. Casey, Merry Christmas to you.
Hey, Merry Christmas to you guys, too.